September 30th, 2022. A Friday like any other in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. The heat was suffocating, as always. The dust hung in the air, and then, shortly after dawn, the guns began to speak. At first, the citizens thought it was another terrorist attack. They had grown used to those. For 7 years, the jihadists had been eating away at their country like a slow cancer. Villages burned. Teachers were beheaded. Children were taken from their classrooms. So when the heavy thud of artillery and the sharp crack of automatic rifles echoed through the streets that morning, many simply stayed inside, pulled their children close, and prayed. But this was different. This was not Al-Qaeda. This was not ISIS. This was the sound of a military coup. And by the time the sun reached its zenith, the president of Burkina Faso, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, was gone. He had fled to Togo, his brief reign over after barely 8 months. Once again, the fate of one of the world's poorest and most tortured nations had been decided by the men with guns, the Western news anchors, sitting in their air-conditioned studios in London and New York, sighed with weary frustration. Another coup, they said, another African general seizing power, another step backward for democracy. They shuffled their papers, played their 30 seconds of footage and moved on to the next story. But they were wrong, terribly, profoundly wrong, because the man who seized power that day was not a general. He was not a politician. He was not a member of the old elite. The man who walked into the presidential palace that afternoon, still wearing the dusty camouflage of the battlefield, was a 34-year-old artillery captain named Ibrahim Traoré. And he was unlike anything West Africa had ever seen. Within hours of the coup, the streets of Ouagadougou did something that confused the Western journalists to no end. The people did not riot. They did not protest. They celebrated. They poured out of their tin-roofed homes and their shanties and their market stalls, and they danced. They waved Burkinabe flags. They set off fireworks in broad daylight. And in a gesture that sent shockwaves through the chancelleries of Paris, they waved Russian flags. They chanted Traoré's name. They wept with joy. To the outside world it looked like chaos. To anyone who had been paying attention to the slow death of the Sahel, it looked like a revolution. The old order was crumbling, and at the center of the rubble, standing calm and still, was a young captain with sunglasses and a red beret, watching his people celebrate their liberation from a system that had failed them for 60 years. To understand Ibrahim Traoré, you have to forget almost everything you think you know about African strongmen. He was not born into power. His father was not a general or a minister or a wealthy businessman. His father was a nurse. His mother a homemaker. They lived in Bondokuy, a small agricultural village in the Boucle du Mouhoun region, where the soil is red and the dust gets into everything, and the only wealth is the health of your family. Ibrahim was born on March 14, 1988. That makes him a millennial. He grew up watching American music videos on battery-powered televisions. He was a child when the internet arrived. He was a teenager when the great dictator Blaise Compaoré, who had ruled Burkina Faso with an iron fist for 27 years, was finally chased from power by mass protests in 2014. Traoré was 26 years old when he watched ordinary citizens topple a regime. That lesson never left him, but here is the detail that surprises most people. Ibrahim Traoré never wanted to be a soldier. He was a bookish kid, quiet and serious. He loved the earth. Not the political earth of borders and wars, but the actual earth, rocks, minerals, the deep structure of the continent. He went to the University of Ouagadougou and studied geology. For 4 years, he pored over maps of ancient cratons and sedimentary basins. He learned to read the landscape like a text. In 2010, at the age of 22, he graduated with a master's degree in geology. It was a good degree. It should have led to a good job. But Burkina Faso in 2010 was a country with no oxygen. The economy was stagnant. Corruption was endemic. The old dictator Compaoré was still clinging to power, bleeding the nation dry. A young geology graduate had 2 choices: wait forever for a government job that would never come, or join the military, where the pay was regular and the food was guaranteed. Traoré chose the military. But even then he did it his own way. He did not apply to the prestigious Kadiogo Military Academy, where the sons of the elite went to become officers with soft hands and clean uniforms. He went to the George Namawano Military Academy, the tough school, the grunt school, the place where they broke you down and rebuilt you into something hard. He graduated vice major of his class, second best. He was not the smartest, perhaps, but he was the most determined. The instructors noticed that about him. He did not complain. He did not quit. He just kept moving forward. The first decade of Traoré's military career coincided with the unraveling of the entire Sahel region. In 2012, northern Mali fell to a coalition of Tuareg rebels and Islamist militants. The French intervened, chasing the jihadists into the desert, but no one ever really kills an insurgency. They just push it somewhere else. By 2015, the cancer had spread to Burkina Faso. The attacks began as pinpricks. A police post here, a customs checkpoint there. Then they grew. The jihadists learned that the Burkinabe army was slow, underfunded and terrified. They learned that the government in Ouagadougou cared more about staying in power than about protecting the villages. So they pushed harder. They burned schools. They destroyed water pumps. They slaughtered men in their fields and took women and children into the bush, never to be seen again. By 2018, Traoré was a lieutenant, and he had seen enough. He volunteered for the United Nations peacekeeping mission in neighboring Mali, known as MINUSMA. It was a brutal posting. The UN mission was famously ineffective, bogged down by bureaucratic rules of engagement that prevented soldiers from firing unless they were fired upon first. But Traoré watched. He learned. He saw how the French operated, how the Malian army failed, how the jihadists exploited every weakness. When he returned to Burkina Faso, he was a different soldier. He had seen the enemy up close. He had smelled their burning trucks and heard their nighttime prayers crackling over captured radios. He knew that the only way to defeat them was to outthink them, outmarch them and outfight them. The story that defines Traoré's early reputation took place in 2020 in the town of Barsalogho. The jihadists had surrounded the town. The main road was mined. The local garrison was pinned down. The high command in Ouagadougou said they could not send reinforcements. The situation, they declared, was hopeless. Traoré looked at the map. He looked at his men, and he told them to follow him. They abandoned their vehicles and marched on foot through the bush, cutting across country, avoiding roads and checkpoints. They moved at night, sleeping in the dirt by day. It took them days to reach Barsalogho. But when they arrived, the jihadists did not know what hit them. Traoré's men flanked the enemy positions, attacked from the direction they least expected, and broke the siege. Barsalogho was saved. That is the story the junior officers tell about their captain. He does not send men to die. He leads them. He sleeps where they sleep. He eats what they eat. And when the shooting starts, he is at the front, not the back. By 2021, the security situation in Burkina Faso had become a catastrophe. The president, Roch Kabore, was a civilian who had no idea how to fight a war. He had inherited a collapsing state and made it worse. He cut deals with the jihadists. He paid ransoms for kidnapped priests. He fired competent generals and promoted loyalists. The army watched in disgust as their country was sold out from under them. In January 2022, a group of young officers decided they had had enough. They were led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, a charismatic and ambitious soldier who had studied in Paris and spoke fluent French. Damiba overthrew Kabore in a bloodless coup. The people cheered. The military applauded. And Ibrahim Traoré, then a captain, supported the move. He believed, like many of his comrades, that Damiba would be different, that a soldier would finally do what the politicians could not. Traoré was wrong. Damiba proved to be a disappointment almost immediately. He talked a good game, appearing on television in crisp uniforms and promising to reconquer the lost territories. But behind the scenes he did nothing. The attacks continued. The body count rose. And the jihadists, sensing weakness, pushed even harder into the heart of the country. In June 2022, the terrorists struck the village of Seitenga, near the border with Niger. They killed at least 86 civilians in a single night, men, women, children. They slit their throats and burned their homes and left the bodies to rot in the sun. It was the deadliest single attack in Burkina Faso's modern history. The army was furious. The junior officers blamed Damiba. They said he was too close to the French, too cautious, too comfortable in the presidential palace, while his soldiers died in the mud. Traoré shared their anger. He had watched Damiba rise and he had watched Damiba fail. By the summer of 2022, Traoré was quietly building a network of disaffected captains and lieutenants. He was not planning a coup, not yet, but he was listening. He was learning. He was waiting. September 30th, 2022, the day it all came together. Traoré did not launch his coup from the capital. He launched it from the town of Kaya, where he commanded the artillery regiment. Kaya is only 100 kilometers north of Ouagadougou, but in military terms, it might as well have been a different planet. The soldiers in Kaya were frontline troops. They had fought the jihadists. They had bled. And they were sick of Damiba. Traoré gathered his fellow officers in a quiet room. He laid out the plan. They would move that night. They would secure the capital. They would arrest Damiba, and they would do it without firing a single shot at their own countrymen, if at all possible. The operation was swift and clean. By dawn, loyalist troops had seized the presidential palace, the state television station, and the airport. Damiba was caught flat-footed. He had no intelligence, no loyal units nearby, no escape plan. Within hours, he was negotiating his own exile. A plane was arranged. He flew to Togo and then to Benin, and then into the shadows of history. That afternoon, Traoré appeared on national television. He looked young. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. He was wearing his field uniform, not a dress uniform. There was dust on his boots. He read a short statement. The security situation, he said, had become unacceptable. The military had decided to take responsibility. He was now the president of Burkina Faso. He was 34 years old, the youngest head of state in the world. The Western reaction was predictable. France condemned the coup. The United States suspended aid. The African Union threatened sanctions. But the people of Ouagadougou, the ordinary Burkinabe who had lost sons and daughters to the jihadists, who had watched their villages burn and their government do nothing, they saw something else. They saw a man who looked like them, a man who had fought their war, a man who wore their dust on his boots. They danced in the streets. They sang his name. They waved Russian flags, not because they loved Vladimir Putin, but because they hated the French, and the Russian flag was the most visible symbol of defiance they could find. For one brief, intoxicating moment, it felt like everything might change. The French, of course, were horrified. They had been the colonial power in Burkina Faso, which they called Upper Volta, and they had never really left. They kept military bases. They advised the government. They controlled the currency, the CFA franc, which forced former French colonies to keep their reserves in French banks. For 60 years, Burkina Faso had been a client state, a vassal, a source of gold and manganese and cheap labor. Damiba had been a French client. He had spoken their language, attended their military schools, taken their phone calls. Traoré was different. Traoré did not take their phone calls. And in January 2023, just 3 months after seizing power, he delivered the message that Paris had been dreading for a generation. He ordered the French military to withdraw from Burkina Faso. All of them. The 400 special forces soldiers, the trainers, the advisors, the intelligence officers. He cancelled the military accords that had been signed in 1961, when Burkina Faso was still a colony in all but name. He gave the French 4 weeks to pack their bags and leave. The French ambassador was summoned to the presidential palace. He was not offered coffee. He was not offered a chair. He was told bluntly and without diplomatic niceties that France was no longer welcome on Burkinabe soil. The symbolism was extraordinary. For 60 years, no African leader had dared to expel the French. Not really. Even when they made speeches about sovereignty, even when they talked about decolonization, they always allowed the French to stay. Because they were afraid of economic retaliation, afraid of assassination, afraid of the secret networks of spies and mercenaries that France had cultivated across the continent. Traoré was not afraid. Or if he was, he did not show it. He watched the French convoys roll out of Ouagadougou, watched the last transport plane lift off from the airbase, and then he turned to his advisors and said, "In effect, now we fight our own war, of course. Expelling the French was only half the equation. Burkina Faso still needed weapons. It still needed intelligence. It still needed training and logistics and all the other things that make a modern military function. And the French were no longer providing them. Enter Russia. Or rather, enter the Wagner Group, the shadowy private military company run by the late Yevgeny Prigozhin. Wagner had already established itself in the Central African Republic and in Mali, where it was fighting alongside the junta against the same jihadist groups that were tormenting Burkina Faso. The calculus was simple for Traoré. The West offered lectures about human rights and democracy and the importance of free elections. Wagner offered guns. No lectures, no conditions, just firepower. In a country that was losing the war against terrorism, that was a tempting offer. Traoré began negotiating with Russian advisors almost immediately. Within months, the first contingent of what is now called the Africa Corps, the rebranded Wagner Force, had arrived in Ouagadougou. They were not there to fight. They were there to train, to advise, to provide the intelligence and targeting assistance that the Burkinabe army so desperately needed. The Western media immediately labeled Traoré a Russian puppet. But that label misses the complexity of the situation. Traoré is not a puppet of anyone. He is a pragmatist. He needed weapons. Russia offered them. France refused. The choice was simple. If the United States or the European Union had offered a better deal, Traoré would have taken it. But they didn't. So he turned east. This is the great irony of the new Cold War in Africa. The West keeps losing influence, not because Russia is so attractive, but because the West keeps tying its aid to conditions that African leaders find humiliating. Do this, don't do that. Reform your judiciary. Protect LGBT rights. Hold free and fair elections. These are worthy goals, but to a man like Traoré fighting for the survival of his nation, they sound like luxuries. He does not have time for luxuries. He has a war to win. By the spring of 2023, Traoré had been in power for 6 months, and the security situation had not improved. The jihadists were still attacking. The body count was still rising. And the patience of the Burkinabe people, which had seemed infinite in the heady days after the coup, was beginning to fray. Traoré responded with radical measures. He announced a general mobilization. He called on all able-bodied citizens to join the fight. He created the Volunteers for the Defense of the Fatherland, a civilian militia that would fight alongside the regular army. And he gave them weapons. The results were immediate and bloody. The militias, composed mostly of young men with minimal training and maximal rage, began conducting operations against suspected jihadist hideouts. Sometimes they found jihadists. Sometimes they found ordinary villagers who happened to live in the wrong place at the wrong time. Human rights organizations began documenting atrocities, massacres, extrajudicial executions, burning of villages, the same tactics that the jihadists used, now being used by the state. Traoré did not apologize. In his view, there was no time for niceties. The jihadists did not play by the rules of war. Why should the army? He told the country, in a nationally televised address, that the fight would be long and hard and ugly. There would be collateral damage. There would be mistakes. But the alternative was surrender, and surrender was not an option. He also suspended elections. The transition period, which was supposed to end in July 2024, was extended indefinitely. How can we vote, he asked, when we are fighting for our survival? It was a familiar argument, one that military strongmen have made since the beginning of time. And it was also in the context of a genuine existential threat, not entirely unreasonable. But the suspension of elections made many people nervous. Traoré had promised to restore civilian rule. Now he was walking back that promise. His supporters said he was being realistic. His critics said he was showing his true colors. Only time would tell which side was right. One of Traoré's most significant achievements was the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States, known by its French acronym AES. The alliance brought together Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, 3 countries run by military juntas, 3 countries that had expelled the French, 3 countries that were fighting the same jihadist insurgency. The AES was not just a diplomatic gesture. It was a mutual defense pact. An attack on one country would be considered an attack on all 3. The member states agreed to coordinate their military operations, share intelligence and pool their resources. They also agreed to leave the regional economic bloc, ECOWAS, which they accused of being a tool of French influence. The creation of the AES was a direct challenge to the old order. For decades, West African countries had looked to France and ECOWAS for security. Now they were looking to each other. Traoré became the de facto leader of this new bloc, the youngest and most charismatic of the three junta leaders. He flew to Bamako and Niamey for summits. He posed for photographs with his counterparts. He spoke of a new Africa, free from foreign domination, united in purpose and action. The West watched with alarm. The AES was not just a military alliance. It was an ideological project. It was a declaration that the era of France-Afrique was over, that the former colonies would no longer accept the role of supplicants, that they would chart their own course, with or without Western approval. Traoré became a hero to Pan-Africanists across the continent. Young people from Senegal to Kenya, from South Africa to Nigeria, posted his picture on social media. They called him the Lion of the Sahel. They compared him to Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso who was assassinated in 1987 and who Traoré invokes constantly. Sankara too had been a young captain. Sankara too had defied France. Sankara too had promised a new Africa. And Sankara too had been murdered by the old order. Traoré knows that history. He knows that Sankara's enemies are still in power, still rich, still connected. He knows that they would love to see him meet the same fate as his hero. So he surrounds himself with loyal soldiers. He does not travel without an armed escort. He sleeps in a different location every night. He is a man who knows that he is marked for death. War is expensive. Burkina Faso is poor. This is a problem. The country's economy has been devastated by the jihadist insurgency. Farmers cannot farm because they are afraid of being killed in their fields. Miners cannot mine because the roads are controlled by bandits. Investors have fled. Tourism is non-existent. The government spends more than a quarter of its budget on defense, money that could have gone to schools, hospitals. Rhodes Traoré has tried to address the economic crisis by asserting control over the country's natural resources. Burkina Faso is rich in gold, manganese and zinc. It also has significant deposits of uranium, though most of the mining happens across the border in Niger. Under the old regimes, French companies extracted these resources for a pittance. Traoré has vowed to change that. He has reviewed mining permits. He has renegotiated contracts. He has demanded that mining companies process more of their product locally, creating jobs and keeping wealth in the country. The mining companies have complained, but they have also complied. They know that Traoré is not bluffing. He is willing to nationalize their assets if they do not cooperate. But renegotiating mining contracts is a slow process. The benefits will take years to materialize. In the meantime, the people are suffering. Food prices have skyrocketed. Unemployment is rampant. The healthcare system, never strong, is collapsing under the weight of war casualties. Traoré has promised to fix these problems. His supporters believe him. His detractors point to the lack of progress and ask, with increasing impatience, where are the results? One of the most striking things about Ibrahim Traoré is the way he is portrayed in Burkinabe media. He is everywhere. His face is on billboards. His speeches are played on repeat on state television. Young people wear T-shirts with his image. Merchants sell keychains and calendars and posters. This is, of course, the standard apparatus of authoritarian rule. Every dictator has a cult of personality. But there is something different about Traoré's. It is not manufactured from above. It rises from below. The people really do love him. At least many of them do. Why? Because he is authentic. He does not live in a palace. He lives in a military barracks. He does not wear expensive suits. He wears combat fatigues. He does not give speeches from behind bulletproof glass. He walks among the crowds, shaking hands, taking selfies, listening to complaints. He is a man of the people in a way that no Burkinabe leader has been since Sankara. The comparison to Sankara is unavoidable. The young captain, the red beret, the revolutionary rhetoric, the defiance of France. Traoré cultivates the comparison. He has visited Sankara's grave. He has quoted Sankara's speeches. He has promised to complete Sankara's unfinished work. For many Burkinabe, especially the young, Traoré is Sankara reborn, returned from the dead to finish what he started. But there is a danger in this comparison. Sankara was assassinated after only 4 years in power. His enemies were numerous and ruthless. Traoré's enemies are even more numerous. The French intelligence services, the old political elite, the jihadists, the regional powers who fear his influence. Any one of them could try to kill him, and if they succeed, the cult of personality will collapse and Burkina Faso will be plunged into chaos. It is easy from a distance to admire Traoré's defiance. It is easy to celebrate the expulsion of the French and the assertion of sovereignty. But there is a human cost to this war that cannot be ignored. By 2025, more than 2 million Burkinabe had been displaced from their homes. They live in camps, in schools, in the homes of relatives, anywhere they can find shelter. They have lost everything: their fields, their animals, their futures. Many of them will never go home. The jihadists control too much territory. The army controls too little. The children are suffering the most. Thousands of schools have been closed because of the violence. An entire generation of Burkinabe children is growing up without education. They are learning to hold guns instead of pens. They are learning to hate instead of to hope. The trauma of this war will last for decades, perhaps generations. Traoré knows this. He sees it every day. He visits the displaced persons camps. He talks to the mothers who have lost their sons. He holds the hands of the orphans, and he promises them that it will end, that the jihadists will be defeated, that they will go home. But the promises ring hollow when the fighting continues, year after year with no end in sight. The international community has not been helpful. The sanctions imposed by ECOWAS and the West have made everything worse. Food imports are choked. Medicine is scarce. The economy is in free fall. Traoré blames the West and his supporters believe him. But the truth is more complicated. The West is not helping, but it is also not the cause of all the suffering. The jihadists are the cause, and the jihadists are not going away. So where does this leave Ibrahim Traoré? What is his future, and what is the future of Burkina Faso? There are 3 possible paths. The first is the path of Thomas Sankara. Assassination. A bullet from a disgruntled officer, a bomb in a car, a poison in a glass. The old order reclaims power, and Traoré becomes a martyr. His image frozen in time, forever young, forever pure, forever unrealized. This is the path his enemies want. It is the path his friends fear. The second path is the path of the African strongman. He stays in power for decades. He holds rigged elections. He enriches himself and his allies. He becomes the thing he once fought against. This is the path of cynicism, of corruption, of betrayal. It happens to good revolutionaries all the time. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Traoré is not immune to this law of human nature. The third path is the path of the genuine liberator. He defeats the jihadists. He restores security. He holds free and fair elections. He steps down from power and becomes a statesman, a Nelson Mandela or a Kwame Nkrumah. This is the path of hope. It is also the least likely. The obstacles are immense. The enemies are many. The margin for error is 0. Traoré himself seems to believe in the third path. He talks constantly of the future, of the new Burkina Faso that will rise from the ashes of the old. He speaks of infrastructure projects, of industrial development, of education and healthcare for all. He is a visionary, but visionaries are often disappointed by reality. History will judge Ibrahim Traoré harshly or kindly, depending on what happens next. If he succeeds, he will be remembered as the man who saved his country from the jihadists, who broke the chains of French neo-colonialism, who built a new Africa from the rubble of the old. His statue will stand in every town square. His name will be taught in every school. If he fails, he will be remembered as just another African strongman, another general who seized power and held it too long, whose promises turned to dust, whose revolution devoured its own children. His name will be a footnote, a cautionary tale, a warning to future generations. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. Traoré is neither saint nor devil. He is a man, a flawed, complex, contradictory man. He has done good things and bad things. He has made wise decisions and foolish ones. He has inspired hope and provoked fear. He is a product of his circumstances, and his circumstances are brutal. The people of Burkina Faso love him because he is fighting their war. They love him because he is willing to bleed for them. They love him because he is one of them. Whether that love will endure, Whether it will survive the inevitable disappointments of power remains to be seen. As of today, Ibrahim Traoré remains in power. The war continues. The jihadists are still killing. The army is still fighting. The children are still dying. The displaced are still waiting to go home. But something has changed. There is a new energy in Burkina Faso, a new determination. The people are no longer passive victims, waiting for someone else to save them. They are fighting for themselves. They are digging trenches. They are joining militias. They are refusing to surrender. That is Traoré's greatest achievement. Not the expulsion of the French. Not the alliance with Russia. Not the suspension of elections. It is the rekindling of the Burkinabe spirit. The belief that they can win, that they deserve to win, that they are worth fighting for. In the end, that may be enough. Or it may not. The jihadists are patient. They have time. They have money. They have ideology. They are not going to give up just because a young captain with a red beret says they should. But neither is Traoré. He is young. He is stubborn. He is fighting for his homeland. He is the lion of the Sahel, and the lion does not retreat. The world is watching. Africa is watching. The young captain from Bondokuy has become a symbol of something larger than himself. He has become a test case for whether the post-colonial order can truly be broken. He has become a question mark over the future of the continent. If he wins, everything changes. If he loses, nothing changes. The stakes could not be higher. There is a moment from Traoré's first speech as president that lingers in the memory. He is standing behind a podium, reading from a sheet of paper, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Behind him, on the wall, hangs the flag of Burkina Faso, a red star on a field of green and gold. The red star, he says, represents the revolution. It represents the blood of the martyrs. It represents the commitment to social justice and the liberation of the people. It has been there since 1984, when Thomas Sankara changed the name of the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, which means the land of upright people. Traoré looks at the flag. He looks at the camera. He looks at the people watching in the streets, on the hillsides, in the refugee camps, and he says quietly that the star will not be extinguished, that the revolution will continue, that the upright people will not bow. The crowd roars. The cameras shake. The dust rises, and for a moment, just a moment, it seems possible that the young captain might actually do it, that he might defeat the jihadists and the French and the old corrupt elite and the weight of history itself, that he might build something new in the red dust of the Sahel. Time will tell. But the star is still shining, and the lion is still roaring. Ibrahim Traoré, 34 years old, captain of artillery, president of Burkina Faso, the world's youngest head of state, the most dangerous man in West Africa, the last hope of a generation. The story is not over. It has barely begun.